Welcome to our webinar on developing talent and leadership from day one. Thank you very much for putting your time aside to join us today. We're going to try and keep the session to 45 minutes, although we will be able to spill over if the questions take us over that line. We very much appreciate you putting this time aside and joining us today in what we hope will be a very interesting and useful discussion. I'm going to begin with a little bit of light housekeeping before we do introductions and get started. Because of the number of people on the line, there's at least 20 people now, and that will probably rise over the next 10-15 minutes. Unfortunately, we have to mute all of the participants, but we do want you to get involved, so there will be poll questions, and there'll also be opportunities to send any questions you have through to us. So my name is Matt Plass. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at Interactive Services. I'm joined by Bryce Tache, who's the Enterprise Learning Manager at Iron Mountain, and also by a colleague of mine, John O'Brien. Now, John O'Brien, if you could send your questions to John, he'll be able to feed those to Bryce and myself as we move through. We'll try to organize the questions as they arrive, but if we can't, we'll hopefully be able to come to all of them at the end. So we're going to start off with a question. It's the question you see on here, and I'll move this on to the next slide. And it's about when leaders become or realize that they are first leaders. So hopefully you've used a poll question in either a WebEx or a GoToMeeting before. I'm going to launch the question up on the screen now, and you should see it should be fairly obvious how you answer it. You're going to select from the 5 options: in the playground, at high school, at college, in their first proper job, or later in their career. And this is really just to get us thinking around the subject, the idea that leaders at some point must realize they're destined for leadership. When do we think that happens? So I can see nearly 60% of people have voted. %. Okay, that's great. So I'm going to close the poll now. Interestingly, nearly 50% of those of you who responded said that leadership begins in the playground. Leaders first discover their leaders in the playground. I would agree with that, and I think that ties in fairly nicely with one of the things that we're trying to illustrate in the webinar today. Interestingly, another 20% thought it began in high school, another 20% at college, and 7% in the first proper job and 7% later in the career. So I guess what we're saying is it can happen at any time, but we all, or the majority of us, feel that it happens fairly early in our life, certainly before we hit the workplace, either in the playground, at high school, or at college. And this, I think you'll see, will feed fairly well into what we're talking about as we move forward. So just so you know who we are, and we'll spend a very brief amount of time, I mentioned that I was joined today by Bryce Tache from Iron Mountain. Bryce, do you want to just give us a quick introduction to yourself and to the company?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. My name is Bryce Tache, as Matt said. I'm excited to chat with everyone today about developing talent and leadership. These are great passions of mine, and sharing a bit about our evolving efforts in these areas at Iron Mountain. If you're not familiar with Iron Mountain, we are a global leader in information management services. In the simplest terms I can think of, we help our customers protect, store, and manage their information, and then, of course, to realize the value of their information. So I'm excited to chat with everyone today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryce. And Interactive Services design and develop learning solutions for global clients. Most of our clients are in the US, although we do have clients in Europe as well. We've worked with Iron Mountain on a piece of their onboarding program, which is one of the reasons we're talking together today. But interestingly, a lot of the themes that we've started to see coming through new hire and leadership training for many of our clients, Iron Mountain are a little bit ahead of the curve in many ways. So it's been great to get Bryce onto this webinar with us. Okay, so here's the proposition, what we're trying to prove with this webinar today. We believe that a new hire program that encourages leadership perspectives and what we call the performance focus from day one will build you a talent bench strength and will inspire future leaders. We'll talk about what we mean by leadership perspectives and performance focus, but this is essentially the proposition. And over the next 40-45 minutes, we're going to talk about leading from day one or even before day one when someone comes into an organization. We'll look at what we mean by performance focus. We'll talk about how those first impressions at new hire really stick. We're going to spend a fair bit of time looking at the Iron Mountain New Hire case study and then some further examples from other clients that show how these ideas weave together. And we will endeavor to leave time for questions at the end. So we're going to go straight into our next poll question. When did you first believe you could contribute to your organization above and beyond your functional role? So at some point, everyone comes into an organization at the beginning of their career in what's largely a functional capacity. You're a doer, you're a producer, but fairly early on, perhaps you realize that you're going to be able to affect in a positive way your organization beyond the role that you've come into the company for. Okay. So I'll close the poll now. I think most people have had a chance to vote. Okay. So again, interestingly, it's those early stages where we believe we first have insight into our own ability to contribute to an organization beyond the functional role. So we have 31% talking about before day one, which means I would take that to mean you just feel you're that kind of person. Before you move into the job, you know you're going to be able to impact the organization. 25% realize through onboarding, 31% during their first year, and then 6% when you become a manager, when you become a leader. So again, we have that sense that it can happen at any time, but it's heavily weighted towards early days. And there's a reason why we're asking this question. Lane Winwood in 2012 has talked about the fact that 67% of organizations find it very difficult to identify and engage and retain talented people. Organizations spend thousands on finding the right people, but often do nothing to continue developing the same important talent resource. It brings us to the question of what we mean when we're talking about the future, a future manager or a future leader. And here's one way of looking at it. We all know that at the early stages of a career, we tend to be individual contributors or team members, and then there's a movement into managing individuals and then on into leadership. Now, I'm sure you all have very clear ideas about what a team member, a manager, or a leader look like, but here's some ideas that we've put together. So team members are essentially functional. They complete tasks, they maintain operations, they work unmanaged 80% of the time. They are the producers. Managers would execute a leader's vision. They manage budget, they manage teams, and they solve operational problems as they pop up. And the leader is in that strategic position. They're setting the direction of the organization, they're inspiring, motivating, aligning inputs and efforts of organizational stakeholders to keep the vision alive, which is another word for making sure that when you hit a bump in the road, you don't abandon the project, you get it back on track, and creating a culture that will help bring the vision to life. So returning to our proposition, if we know, and the poll question suggests we do, that even at team member stage, people who have future leadership potential are aware of that, how do we get some of this leadership thinking in at that early stage? So we start to prepare people for the future early on. Well, it really depends, I think, on how you look at a career. And this is, I suppose, another version of the previous slide. It's one way to look at a career. You start as a team member, you move into management, and if you shine as a manager, you essentially move into leadership. But here's another way to look at a career. We begin over on the left in a functional capacity, but very quickly we start to pick up a few leadership responsibilities. And as our career moves from left to right through being a team member, a leader, a manager, director, up to VP and above, we start to see less functional and we start to see more leadership until at the end it's 100% leadership and almost zero functionality. If we see careers through this framework, we start to see that actually from the very beginning we want to build some of this leadership thinking and leadership perspective into day one and into that functional training piece. So I'm going to hand over now to Bryce to talk us through what they call the deal at Iron Mountain, which I think begins to illustrate some of the concepts we've started to talk about already today. Bryce?
Thanks. Yes, so at Iron Mountain, last year we rolled out a global framework called Managers Who Lead. And this is all packaged in what we call the deal, which is a hard copy summary of the program or of the framework. That the deal is shared with all new people leaders before or on their first day. So it really is one of the very first constructs that we introduce to our new leaders and immerse them in that framework. This is all about calling out, clarifying the role and expectations of our leaders at Iron Mountain. This applies to what we call here every people manager. So that's from frontline supervisors all the way to our senior executive team, so that everyone knows right from the start how we're defining and measuring the impact of our leaders. We aspire, and we rolled this out just last year, so this is a continuously evolving framework here, but we really aspire for this program to be the foundation of every performance discussion, every development plan, every interaction with our teams and colleagues. And certainly before its launch, we had leadership characteristics, we had developmental opportunities, et cetera, but we never really packaged everything together and shared it with our new leaders before or on day one. So I believe on the next slide, Matt, we have a sample of what those characteristics are. And rather than get into the overarching characteristics, maybe I can just spend a moment just quickly sharing that what we spent a lot of time doing was aligning each of those across 5 levels of the organization. And the goal here was so that we could be very explicit about the different types of behaviors, the different knowledge, the different skills that's needed to perform successfully. And of course, all of that differs across the different levels. So for a leadership characteristic of thinking and acting strategically, for instance, we might look to a frontline worker to demonstrate that by taking a logical approach to how to solve a problem with the customer. Perhaps for a more senior leader, we would look at that same characteristic and talk more about how you can think about an emerging business need and how you could lead a plan with your team to address those needs. I believe on the next slide there is another example tied into the thinking and acting strategically. And this is a virtual learning and networking event that we are piloting this year. We at Iron Mountain do not have field-led orientations. It's all done virtually, and that's in part because we have such a disparate geographic workforce. And what we're piloting here is all of our new hires, not just our people leaders, but every new hire, and we hire about 1,400 employees in North America each year. They attend a virtual session so that they can understand our corporate strategy in a way that really resonates, and how each employee coming out of this, they will then talk to their supervisor or manager to make sure that they understand what their role is in the larger organization and how they can help us achieve success with our customers or internally with our team members and, of course, with our shareholders. This session gets a bit into our culture, but really here the main goal is to make our new hires strategic, and most of our new hires are attending this type of session within their first 14 days. I think, Matt, you had either a poll question next or some other information you'd like to share.
We do. Thank you, Bryce. So, I mean, what's really interesting for me with what Bryce just shared is we're seeing a lot of our clients doing something similar, but they haven't pulled it together in such a cohesive package. I really like what Iron Mountain are doing here. They are definitely pulling some of those leadership characteristics and thinking back into the early stages of new hire, and we'll dig into this program a little bit later on.